Yeah, well, thank you so much for that introduction, Brandy, and good morning, everybody. For those that I haven't had the chance to meet, I'm Christina Fisher. A little bit about my background. I did serve as a regional coordinator in the eastern part of the state for about 17 years before I moved into this role that I'm in now. So just want to put in a plug for your regional coordinators. They are a great resource on all of these topics. And so that's how I sort of developed the expertise that I do have, is supporting boards in their closed session activities and helping districts, with meeting minutes and doing those sorts of things. So that's a little bit about my background. And again, your coordinators are a great resource for questions, but always feel welcome to contact me as well. So we're going to talk about closed sessions this morning. And so let's see this. There we go. So open meetings law, public records law, a lot of times they're referred to as the sunshine laws. It basically has to allow the public to have access to the transactions of government and what we're doing and know about the things that we do. And so letting the sunshine in on government activities is what this is about. So government transparency is at the heart of open meetings law. All official meetings in public bodies and decision-making by public bodies must be conducted openly. And so your district board is a public body, and that's why these things are important. Open meetings law requires that we notice our meetings and also allow public access to the meetings and the record keeping of meetings through minutes. So what meetings need to be open to the public? An official meeting is a meeting, assembly, or gathering of a majority of the members of the public body for the purpose of conducting hearings, participating in deliberations, voting on public business, or otherwise transacting public business. So when your board gets together, if there's 3 or more of them together, that's considered a meeting. And those need to be officially noticed. Now, that said, if they're all end up at the same cookout on a Sunday afternoon, without planning to transact public business in any way, then that's not necessarily considered a meeting. And obviously we don't need minutes and announcements for those sorts of things, but just sort of be careful, know where folks are getting together, and definitely if they are at that cookout, make sure they're not talking about district business at that time. Keep it separate and make sure we notice those meetings that are official. Let's see. So again, the open meetings law says that every meeting must be open to the public and any person is entitled to attend those meetings. But things do sort of get complicated in district offices. So we do have both federal records and state records. And so some of these things are intertwined in some of our folders. And so Freedom of Information Act applies to the federal records, and then also Section 1619 of the 2008 Farm Bill. And then we also have North Carolina General Statute 139-8.2. So these pieces are considered confidential, and those things that are confidential don't necessarily get discussed in an open meeting. So then we would have these closed sessions where we exclude members of the public from those discussions. We do encourage districts to use filing systems where they separate federal records from those district records, just because that'll make your life a little bit easier if you do get a public records request, and we can sort of keep those things separated. So some of the common federal records, the type of things that you would not want to be talking about in open session, are conservation plans, federal program contract information, job sheets, documents signed by or under the authority of NRCS, correspondence on federal letterhead, federal forms, and then information generated or housed in the federal system. So probably at your meetings, you'll notice that your federal partner, when they give reports, it's more generic. They don't talk about specific contracts in the open session. Now, that is something that your board could have access to in closed session, because it's important for folks to be aware of what's going on in their district and be able to support those activities, but it's definitely not public information. So that protected information, those that are protected by that Section 1619 of the 2008 Farm Bill, and then our General Statute 139-8.2, these are farm, tract, field, and federal contract numbers, geospatial information, resource data, designs, assistance notes, and acreage amounts. So these things are protected. I do often hear, questions come up in board meetings like, oh, where is that farm located? Or, how many acres are we doing cover crop on? And those sorts of details should not be discussed in those open portions of the meeting. So we do have some resources on our website, which I'm going to walk you to once we get through this, just so you can sort of see where some reference things are. But generally, for the open meetings, we want to stick to very broad topics, right? And then getting in on these finer details is when we would need to go into closed session. Then we also have the PII that's protected under North Carolina Public Records Law. You probably don't have a lot of these things. You may have some financial information on some of those tax forms that our producers are required to fill out to participate in our programs, but these things are also protected and, of course, wouldn't be discussed in open session. So, do we need to keep minutes? And this will be sort of intertwined with the next topic, but we do need to keep full, accurate minutes of all official meetings, including those closed sessions. So they can be in writing or they can be audio or video recordings. I know a lot of districts will record the meeting and then use that recording as a reference to prepare their written minutes. But they are public records and they are subject to public inspection. And in the closed session, you have to keep a general account of what takes place. So it doesn't need to be, very specific details unless there's, a motion and a second and those sorts of things. But it could just be a summary of, we reviewed conservation plans prepared by our federal partner. If there are details in the minutes, they can be, for the closed sessions, they can be withheld from public inspection if this would frustrate the purpose of the closed session. So one of the reasons you can go into closed session is for real property negotiations. So say you were, coming up with a price that you were going to offer on a piece of property, and that was something that was included in those closed session minutes. That could be, withheld from public inspection until the property closes. And then at that point, it's no longer a need to keep it, secret necessarily or confidential. And at that point, you would release those minutes. But I think for our purposes, dealing with confidential records related to our programs, it's probably pretty unlikely that those would ever be opened if there were, some of those protected details included in there. All right, so closed sessions. Districts are public bodies and subject to open meetings law. There are specific situations where you can exclude the public when open session might harm the public interest or an individual's privacy. So the law itself does spell out 10 reasons that you can go into closed session, and they're pretty specific, but the ones that are probably going to be the most common for districts is the first one. So to protect information that's privileged or confidential pursuant to the law. You also may have personnel type issues dealing with complaints against a public officer or an employee or a grievance or those sorts of things. That can also be discussed in closed session, but it's pretty specific about what can be covered. In general, most of the things we discuss have to be open to the public. So how do you call a closed session? You can only do this when you have a proper motion and a second adopted during an open board meeting. The proper motion will state one of the 10 legislative and permissible reasons. And if the reason for the closed session is for the confidential information, you have to state the law that makes that information confidential. The board can ask others to assist the board by attending the closed session, and then those minutes should be a general account. And the board can only address the items cited in the motion during the closed session. So the reason, you're going into closed session, definitely just stick to that topic while you're in that closed session. So here is the proper language for calling closed session. And this is probably the most important slide in this presentation, just as a point of reference for all of you. But this tells you how you can legally call that closed session. So you have a motion and a second to go in closed session to prevent disclosure of information that's privileged or confidential, and the information to be reviewed is protected by Section 1619 of the 2008 Farm Bill and North Carolina General Statute 139-8.2. So that's a mouthful, right? And it is something that I would encourage you to have like a little cheat sheet for your chair or other members of your board, just so they have the proper language to call that closed session. That would be a good thing to keep in their folders for your meetings. So then you've got to go into closed session. You have your discussion related to those privileged and confidential topics, and then you've got to return to open session. So when the topic is finished, you have to make a motion and a second to return to that open session. And at that point, once you're back in the open meeting, that's when you would make decisions related to state cost share contracts. So applications, contracts, those approvals, the motions and seconds to approve those items have to be handled in open session. Also, just a note, the board cannot adjourn from closed session. So this should be done back in the open meeting. So I know a lot of times, particularly if it's to talk about a personnel type issue, the board will hold the closed session like at the end of the meeting. And just to have their discussion, but they do need to return to open session to adjourn. And then I've just got some resources for you here, the general statutes that are relevant. There's also a North Carolina Open Government Guide, which really digs in on all the things sunshine laws related. And then this Coates Canons is actually a great resource as well. It's a blog that's put together by the UNC School of Government. And they have all kinds of topics related to finance and open meetings and public records. And so sometimes if I would get sort of a different question from a district that I hadn't heard before, I would go to this resource and see if anything had been put together by the university folks as a point of reference. So let me close this. And I'm going to take you to our website. And just show you a couple resources on here. So under the 4 Soil and Water Conservation Districts tab, there is a resources tab. And we've got information here about both district confidentiality, which is that 139-8.2 statute. This is where we've got several examples for you. So we do have an example cost share spreadsheet for open meetings. So this, I think, is very helpful for districts to know and use, but it basically shows you an example of how you could keep track of your contracts in a given year. And so this is some of the details that our attorney has told us are okay for open session. So you've got the applicant name, the agreement number, the amount spent, remaining, the practices, the program fund, the ranking score, and then some important dates. I would feel very comfortable to talk about any of these things in open session. But if there was any detail that's not on here, like the acreage amounts we talked about or the location, those sorts of things you definitely want to be going into closed session to discuss because they are specifically protected by law. So we've also got example meeting agenda and minutes here. And then we had a webinar on district confidentiality back in 2021. I haven't watched that in a while. I should look to see, but I don't think any of our guidance has changed since that time. We've also got some tabs here on open meetings law, and this is where that guide related to open government is posted. And so that's again, a good resource for you that sort of walks through public records and let's see, here's the open government guide. And so it walks through, questions, responding to a records request, open meetings, access to meetings. Then there's those reasons for closed sessions. So this digs in on the topic a bit more. You can see it's 37 pages long, but it would be a good thing to be familiar with, especially because, the way we do business, public business is different than the way, private businesses have to transact their business. So that's all I've got on the presentation. Brandy, are there any questions? I've lost my chat. There we go. Let's
I don't
see.
see any at this point.
Okay.
Does anyone have any questions? You can come off mute. You can raise your hand. You can put it in the chat. I know that this is like a lot for me, even for me personally. Like there is a lot of information. So no question is a dumb question. Feel free to say anything because it's fluid and it's complicated at times. So yeah, we've been there.
All right. So I do have a little closed session quiz that we can do together to sort of, take some of these points home. Let me make it a little bit bigger. So
And it's not showing your screen, Christina.
yes, I
Oh,
was
okay, okay,
just
perfect.
trying to get it ready so I didn't, so it was a little bit easier to digest. So
Oh, love it.
okay. Okay. So I don't know how to do quizzes on Teams. There's probably a way to do like a fun little click here. But if you guys want to, maybe just you can type your answer in the chat. So the first one, what's a closed session? Hopefully this one, if you'll just want to type your letter answer to respond to that. All
Okay, we
right,
got them
B.
coming
Okay.
in.
Good, good. All right. So yes, of course, a closed session is a segment of a meeting that's confidential and restricted to those certain participants. And we talked about that. The folks that are entitled to participate in the closed session is your board, but they can invite others to participate in the discussion if they're helpful. And also, if they're going to discuss confidential information, they have to be the type of folks that are privy to those confidential details. Oh, we've got some folks already chiming in on C. Oh, yes. All
Love
right.
this.
Yeah, cool. So C, who's typically allowed to attend a closed session? I sort of spoke to that and gave you the answer there, but yeah, C, board members and individuals whose presence is necessary to discuss the matter. All right, so what is typically not a permitted topic for closed session? I know we've talked about the things that are permitted, but what do you think might not be approved for a closed session? All right, good. Budget approval, yes. Those budget approvals always need to happen in an open meeting, so. All right, true or false? Minutes of closed session can be withheld from public inspection under certain circumstances. All right, true. Yes, that is true.
Y'all are good.
I know.
I'm impressed.
All right. So before entering a closed session, the board must generally. All right, good. Yes. Approve the motion and state the reason for the closed session. And again, it needs to be one of those purposes that's approved under the law. Have lunch would be nice though, yes. Especially if it's going to be a lengthy discussion, right? You need some refreshment
Mm,
before that.
facts.
All right, true or false? Closed sessions should be used frequently to avoid public scrutiny. What do you think about that? Catherine says false. False, false, right. So of course, that's not the reason that we call these closed sessions. We do them to protect that information that's privileged and confidential. But you should not feel uncomfortable to do the closed sessions. This is allowed under law. And if I was a supervisor, I would probably want to have a closed session to talk about cost share at almost every board meeting because I want to know where my contracts are being put on the landscape. And I want to know who's participating. And I want to know how many acres we're working on. So those sorts of questions I think are good. We just need to follow the process and go into the closed session to deal with them. All right, so when returning from closed session, the governing body typically Right, that's a good one. B, reports any decisions or actions taken that may be disclosed. And again, just to emphasize, those approvals of state cost share contracts, they need to be done in open session. So make sure that's your process. All right, which of the following would most likely justify a closed session? What do you think about that one? Yes, staff performance. Yes, those specific personnel type topics can be discussed in closed session. Now, general personnel policy, general things that apply to all the folks in your office, that needs to be done in open session. But if it's dealing with an individual, that can often be done in closed session. All right, true or false? Participants may freely share information discussed during a closed session with people outside the meeting. What do you think about that? False. Yes, false. Correct. So what if you could just freely discuss it, what would be the point of going into closed session at all, right? This is the information we need to protect. And then true or false, legal counsel may attend a closed session to provide legal advice. True, true, true. Yes, that's one of those individuals that would be important for the board to have access to provide information and as a sounding board for those legal questions. All right, a closed session is typically used to discuss all right, C, yes, those confidential contract negotiations would be a topic that could be covered in closed session. I'm looking back, I see a question related to our specific public records requests made to the state division, or does the public make them directly to the individual districts? So it can be both, actually. The state, we do sometimes get public records requests, but districts also have to field those when they come through. And once we get through this little quiz, which I think we're almost through, I'll point you towards a resource related to public records requests that we have on the website. It does sort of give you some background information and then like an optional form that folks could fill out. The public records requests are tricky though, and that's probably a topic, Brandy, that we could spend a whole, one of these segments on,
For sure.
because there's a lot of finer points associated with it, and those forms that districts can use that we have as an example, you can not you can't require folks to put their request in writing. So they're a little bit different, but you can sort of offer them that so that you fully understand what they're requesting. But we'll get to that after we get through this quiz. So, all right. So what's the primary purpose of limiting attendance at a closed session? Right, B. So ensure confidentiality for those sensitive matters. Okay, and then this question comes up a lot as well. What about voting during closed session? What do you think about that? Right, allowed only if permitted by law and properly recorded. So sometimes I've heard folks say, "Oh, you can't ever, approve anything in closed session," but that's not true. But the state cost share contracts, again, make sure those happen in the open session. All right, true or false? Closed sessions can be called at any time without stating a reason. Right, of course, that one's false. We had that cheat sheet statement for you to share with your board members so we can do that properly. All right, and then consequences. What is a potential consequence of improperly holding a closed session? Right. The legal challenge or invalidation of actions. And so that can get really complicated when we're talking about contract things and other pieces. So just make sure we do things properly. And I think that was our last one. So great job, guys. You all, I think everybody got 100 on that. So that's great. I appreciate your participation in that. So let me walk us to that public records reference on the division website. So um, again, if you go to this 4 districts tab and then the resources tab, we have a public records section. And then there's this guidance for local soil and water conservation districts. So this sort of, it's very small. Let's see. This sort of breaks things down for you. But one thing I would encourage you is if you do get a public records request, you probably to your county attorney or someone else to make sure you're consistent in the response. That's an important thing. And you may want to have one person in your office, designated as the person that deals with those records requests so that those responses can be consistent. But I do encourage you to sort of touch base with the county attorney, and you may want to adopt a district policy related to this as well. So again, this could be a whole topic on its own, but this resource hopefully will give you some background information and let you know if there are questions or other things that we can help you with. Let us know.
We do have a question for you in the chat, Christina. So,
Yeah.
Catherine out in Randolph asked, we recently discussed in an open session how much money came in from an organization and what that money funded to determine if we should give more money to that organization. Were we to go into closed session to discuss what money came in and how it was used, or can they do that in open session?
So I think like the public dollars, is something that we want to do in open session typically. So dealing with budgets and those sorts of things always happens in open session. I think if there was a donation, that would be something that would be recorded, and you need to incorporate that into your budget so you have a balanced budget through the year. So I think open session was appropriate for that. Yeah.
Good question.
Any other questions? Otherwise, we're going to switch gears a little bit and talk about minutes.
And we do have time, if you think that you have time, Christina, we do have time for a quick little break if we want to do a quick little 5 minute. Do you guys want to do a 5 minute little break? Go get another cup of coffee or a drink, and we will dive into meeting minutes. And I'll also keep an eye on the chat if anything comes up. So we'll see you guys back at 11:05.
All right.